You're listening to the Mobile Payments Today podcast, episode 4. Today's podcast is sponsored by Kount. Kount is an e-commerce fraud prevention solution. The enterprise solution uses advanced machine learning technologies combined with customized policy rules and dozens of other features to prevent fraud for online businesses. Learn more at Kount.com. Kount.com.
Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of the Mobile Payments Today podcast. I am your host and the editor of Mobile Payments Today, Will Hernandez. So this week I'm going to go ahead and dive into the news because there are a few things that happened that I believe are worth bringing to your attention here right away. And the first thing I'm going to start with is, you guessed it, mobile P2P. I know that's something that I mentioned last week, and if you caught our episode from 2 weeks ago, I have the interview with Luann Alexander from Zelle, but I think it's worth mentioning mobile P2P again this week because of the Q2 results for both Venmo and Zelle that show how consumers are really adopting mobile P2P in large quantities, and Venmo and Zelle together combined for $42 billion worth of transactions in Q2. It breaks down to $28 billion for Zelle and $14 billion for Venmo. Both were significant increases from Q2 last year, as well as good increases from the first quarter of this year. And the reason I bring this up yet again is that mobile P2P is showing its value to consumers, and that's something that we really haven't seen from NFC mobile wallets. Both Zelle and Venmo are solving the problem of paying people back without cash, and they're both easy to use, and those are two reasons right there why we continue to see such huge numbers for both services, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens throughout the rest of 2018 and into 2019. The next bit of news that I wanted to bring up was the fact that Grubhub bought Level Up for $390 million, and Grubhub revealed that during its Q2 earnings call last week, and it definitely caught a lot of people by surprise because there was never an official announcement about this, and nobody, which is common in these situations, knew that Level Up was even up for sale. But if you're unfamiliar with Level Up, they're a payments and loyalty platform that at first was designed specifically for quick service restaurants. And the reason I said at first is because a few years back, Level Up had flirted with the idea of bringing their platform to other retail segments, specifically supermarkets like Sweetgreen and Potbelly. So you can see why a company like Grubhub acquired them. And again, it's going to be interesting to see how Grubhub utilizes Level Up down the road. They've already said that they envision Level Up operating like a separate company, so I'm sure Level Up will continue to work with QSRs going forward. And on that note, this week I am chatting with Don Bush, the Vice President of Marketing at Kount. Don is joining us for the first of 3 podcasts that Kount is sponsoring about fraud. And after my chat with Don, stick around for Bradley Cooper. He is the editor for 2 publications at Networld Media Group, Digital Signage Today and Blockchain Tech News. I'll be right back after this break.
The Fraud Prevention Industry Benchmark Survey was launched to gain insights for the comparison of key performance indicators such as manual review rates, chargeback rates, false positive rates, and other metrics across different types of merchants. The analysis report is intended to serve as a resource for industry-specific metrics related to fraud prevention. Download the report with over 30 pages of data in the white papers section at Kount.com. That's Kount.com.
And welcome back to the Mobile Payments Today podcast. I am here with my guest this week, and that is Don Bush. He is the Vice President of Marketing for Kount. And as I mentioned in the first segment, Don is going to be joining us on the podcast for the first of 3 episodes in a series about fraud. And the next 2 episodes will air August 17th and then again on August 31st. And Don, thanks for taking the time this week to talk. I really appreciate it. How's it going?
Well, it's good to be here. This is a topic that I think everybody's interested in.
No, definitely. It's something that comes in that we see in the news again and again here as we go along in 2018. And on that note, with us focusing primarily today on e-commerce and mobile fraud, obviously e-commerce fraud right now, it's costing online merchants billions of dollars a year. And Experian had a study earlier this year that found that the e-commerce fraud actually went up in 2017 from 2016, and 30% it was. And one or two primary reasons that are contributing to this increase that Kount has seen from your end.
You're right. I see studies all the time from 20 to 40% increases in fraud year over year. It's an area that continually grows. And I think there's a couple of first out of the barrel things that we could talk about. One is fraudsters are getting better. They're smart, they're sophisticated, they're very well networked. They create software and other tools that make doing their dirty work easier, faster, cheaper. Barrier to entry to become a real effective criminal online is pretty low. You read just like I do every day of data breaches and things like that. And when you've got that much data available to you and the sophisticated tools that they're using, fraud becomes easier and easier and easier. For example, I've got a video that I pulled off of YouTube about a 14-year-old talking about how to break into PayPal accounts so he could get on his Pokemon site and it wouldn't cost him. So easy a kid could do it, right? So that's one thing. I think they're getting better at their craft. The other thing is, if you remember back in 2015, the United States started going to their chip and PIN cards. It was late 2015, so I wouldn't have expected to see a lot change in that year. But in 2016 and 2017, we started to see a shift, a migration, if you will, from criminals that would use counterfeit credit cards, physical plastic counterfeit credit card that they would make and go to the store and use. And they shifted those efforts with the introduction of chip and PIN to the U.S. to online. Online fraud is, quite honestly, easier to commit. You don't have to show up in person. It's called card not present for a reason. You don't have to be there. And yet the data for financial tools like credit cards or accounts or other financial things that you buy things online with, all you need is the information. If I have Apple Pay, I don't have to scan my credit card. I just put the number and the expiration date and the code in, and then I'm good. So criminals can buy that data pretty easily and then use it online. No physical presence is necessary. No physical piece of plastic is necessary. And as we've seen chip and PIN migrate into stores as they put in the new hardware and start requiring that, we've seen those fraudsters, they don't just go away. They don't retire because, it was a good life back in the day. They just shift their tactics, and now they've shifted them online, and that's helping exacerbate this growth that we're seeing.
You mentioned how the criminals now are staying ahead of the times and maybe sometimes a step ahead of the fraud prevention that might be out there. How do you as a company keep pace with these guys, especially if they're coming up with new tools all the time to perpetuate fraud?
You bring up a good point. Well, because they have one job to do, and that's steal from you and me and other businesses. And if you're a business, you have financial regulations, you have compliance, you have PCI, you have all these different things that we have to comply with. Well, they really don't have any rules. And so they can work faster. They don't have to worry about, not meeting regulation because they don't. And when you're a merchant online, you've got a business to run, you've got financials and inventory and operations and logistics. You've got all these different things to a business that you've got to run. And fraud is only a piece of that. Our company, like Kount, that's all we do. All we do is look at what are the fraudsters up to? What are their new techniques? What are their new tools that are on the market? How are they getting past systems today? What are they doing to make it difficult for merchants and other retailers online? And so that's our job. We get to stay ahead of these folks because that's all we do. We assist those merchants in that piece of their business that is payments and fraud, but that's all we do. And so with that singular focus, it gives us a great advantage to stay ahead of those folks.
So now these days you have something else to look at with mobile and with mobile fraud, with so much more commerce being done from a mobile device. I mean, we're seeing it everywhere, from the Amazons of the world to the QSRs of the world, who are doing lots more mobile-oriented buying. I mean, you can take an example such as Starbucks. So when you look at that aspect of it, what are some of the challenges and issues there that Kount has seen in terms of the mobile channel as it relates to fraud?
I think there's a couple of things that come to mind real quickly. And one is companies that are doing business via mobile have some strategic things to think about. One is their customer actually going to buy from their mobile device? You could buy a car online today if you wanted to. I mean, you could buy a car using an app, but most people probably aren't going to. They may do their research. They may go to a comparative site. They may do some looking. But most people, if they're going to buy a car that way, they're going to use a desktop or something with a larger screen so they can get a better look. The first one is, are our customers inclined to purchase something from their mobile device? If I'm selling cars, I probably need to have research more focused than the purchase. If I'm selling tickets to a ball game or to the theater, or if I'm selling something small, maybe shoes, I may have a customer that's more inclined to purchase from a mobile device. And so strategically, I've got to look at it differently. And that gives me some things to work on. The second part of that is the payment. When you start looking at how things are purchased via a mobile device, again, you've got a smaller screen. Even if it's an iPad, it's a smaller screen. How do I engage them when it comes to payment? I mean, there's 250 plus payment types around the world. I certainly can't have all those available. Which are the ones that are going to be most profitable to me as a business? Is it Apple Pay? Is it Visa, MasterCard? Is it PayPal? What are the ways my customer prefers to pay? And so when you start thinking about those types of aspects, it really can change the strategy of what you do on mobile. The problems that we see is a lot of folks out there, because they don't do what we do every day, they go at it in a whole different way. They basically take what they did on one platform, let's say a desktop, and move it to a mobile device. And you and I both know it's not a great experience. If I want a credit card number and a QWERTY keyboard shows up, it's kind of kludgy to put that in. And so if I'm really looking to make the mobile experience a good one for the consumer, I'm going to think ahead about some of those things. The last part of that would be is folks that create an app. You mentioned Starbucks. There's folks like Dunkin' Brands and Wendy's and Tim Hortons up in Canada. McDonald's, they have apps. Order ahead, pick up when you go there. Well, if you haven't looked at fraud while you're developing that app, if fraud is an afterthought, that's usually not a really good thing. And it sneaks up on folks that do a lot of POS or card present. If all I've ever done in my business is have somebody swipe their credit card or insert their credit card into my machine when I make a purchase, and now I'm going to create an app, I might not think of the differences between a card present and a card not present transaction. And they're very, very different.
And it almost sounds like, in some ways, just hearing you describe this, and I've heard this from others before, that in that sense that the mobile environment is different from the e-commerce, from the desktop environment, it almost sounds like mobile could be more of a minefield in some ways for retailers over desktop shopping. I mean, is that fair to say right now?
I think for those that aren't planning ahead or aren't putting a strategy in place for their mobile channel, you're absolutely right. We've seen folks that, we call it a 911 situation. They've released an app and they hadn't considered fraud, and now the fraudsters have found out there's weaknesses in that app, and they're, robbing them blind. Well, once you release an app, it's hard to unrelease that. It's not a great customer experience, and so you got to fix it pretty quickly. So planning ahead and looking at those platforms as different is critical when you start looking at a customer experience being enjoyable and matching the brand experience you want those customers to have. And fraud can be a huge hiccup for folks that have not planned ahead.
In terms of planning ahead, we've seen the payments industry in general do some things to help stop fraud, prevent fraud for as much as possible. We obviously talked about EMV at the point of sale being a help, but we also see how some of that fraud, like you mentioned, had migrated over to online. So do you see the payments industry, just in terms of the networks, obviously Visa and MasterCard are leading the charge with tokenization and things like that, but that's not the end-all be-all for stopping fraud. So do you see that the industry is doing enough here as we go forward to combat the multiple types of fraud issues that we continue to see out there?
We work a lot with those brands and other financial institutions, and they are working feverishly, but they are big organizations with legacy platforms that don't change on a dime. I mean, chip and pen technology was available in the 90s. So 20 years ago, that was available, and it just got around to being in place, 3 years ago? Not quite 3 years ago. So I think they're trying, but they move pretty slowly. And the pace of fraud, as you see, 30%, that's pretty rapid. So that's where people like us, like Kount, comes in and says, we can bridge that gap. What the payments industry can't do quickly enough, or because of the legacy that they have to pull along with them, we can bridge that gap, and we can move much more quickly, much more efficiently in helping to mitigate the fraud that gets caught there. Now, they've done some things. They started with, a few years ago, the CVV code on the back of your card. What are those 3 numbers? The problem is that is a static piece of information, and static information can be stolen easily. If I went on any of a dozen or more websites, I can buy credit card information that includes the CVV code. So you've got to have a dynamic solution to a static problem. And that's where companies like myself come in. Like I said, we bridge that gap where they're trying to come up to speed as much as possible, and they work with us very collaboratively. They just can't move that ship quick enough.
From Kount's perspective, and I was listening in on a webinar last week, and I'm familiar with what Kount has done over the years. So I maybe probably know the answers to this question, but maybe for other merchants who are listening, who are out there, what are some of the baseline things that merchants should be doing right now to make sure that they're combating all types of fraud as much as possible right now?
There's a couple of things that we tell all merchants. The first thing is, do your own audit. Look at your own system. And keep this in mind. What you did last year is not good enough for this year. It just moved 30% growth. That's too rapid to think that what you did last year or the year before is just going to keep pace. You do that with your financials every year. You audit your finances. Where are we losing money? Where are we making money? Where can we be more efficient? Same thing has to happen when you talk about payments and fraud. That needs to be done, and everybody can do that internally and look at what their issues are. Secondly is we do our seminar series around the world. We'll be in Chicago and Toronto next month, where we meet with hundreds of merchants and we talk about issues that they're having. And one of the things that I do at those is I say, raise your hand if in the last 30 days you've gone to your own app or your own website and made a purchase. Because fraudsters do that all the time. And they can tell by the way the checkout goes, by the way the experience goes, as to whether this is a sophisticated merchant or not, and if they can break through and steal things. That would be the second piece. Go to your own website or your own app, make a purchase, see what the experience is. It's good practice anyway. The third thing is many merchants out there do this, but many don't, and that is, what does a normal customer look like in your business? And I say that because if I'm buying airline tickets, I react differently than when I'm buying shoes. And if I'm a shoe salesman and I have a shoe site or a shoe app, I need to know what my normal average customer looks like. Do they buy socks when they buy shoes? Do they buy during business hours or late at night? Do they buy with a coupon? Do they buy with overnight shipping? Do they buy 2 pair or more at a purchase? What are those normal activities that I see? Because if I don't know what my normal activities are, I don't know what my abnormal activities are. Is it normal for somebody to buy 6 pair of shoes and ship them all to one location overnight? Maybe, but I don't know. I've got to do that research myself, and every merchant can do that. They've got the information, they've got the data, they just need to do the analysis. Number 4 would be talk to your payment provider. They may have tools that you're not using today. We've got several payment provider partners: Braintree PayPal, Moneris up in Canada, Blue Snap, Cayenne, Chase Payment Tech. All of these have partnered with Kount, and if you're a merchant of one of those, or ask your payment provider, they may have other tools available to you. Ask them if there's something you're not taking advantage of, because they want to help you. They really do. So there's 4 or 5 things right there that any merchant can do. It doesn't cost them anything except maybe a little time. And then, of course, if they're really serious about stopping fraud and they want professional advice like from us, we'd be happy to go and look at an ROI and how we might be able to help them reduce their fraud and actually increase their revenue. So there's a few things they can do.
Well, listen, Don, thanks for taking the time this week. And obviously, this is an important topic right now. This is something that we are continuing to talk about, and Kount is out there fighting the good fight in terms of fraud. And Don, obviously, we'll be talking again here in the next couple of weeks. So thanks for joining us this week, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Thanks, Will. We'll see you next time.
And welcome back to the Mobile Payments Today podcast. I am here now with my guest this week for the weekly editor segment, and that is Bradley Cooper. Bradley is the editor of Digital Signage Today, as well as Blockchain Tech News. And Bradley, thanks for coming on to the show this week. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Will.
We decided that it might be a better idea to talk more about the blockchain side of things. And one of the things that we did talk about was this whole idea of the loyalty blockchain app. You mentioned how the space is growing.
Well, you're seeing a lot of interest. There's been a lot of companies coming up with solutions for that. For example, there's lots of companies that say, okay, if you have a customer and they purchase a lot of things from your company, then we'll generate these tokens for these customers, and then they can use that, say, for example, to redeem for a purchase or to get a discount or something like that. So you're seeing a lot of interest. You're not seeing a whole lot of rollout yet, which I think is a pretty big problem right now in the blockchain industry.
Is there a particular reason why we're not seeing that rollout? Is there just not enough interest from consumers there, or what exactly is happening there that we're not seeing that rollout right now?
I'll give you a great example of that. So recently, IBM announced their big blockchain platform, which is for financial services. But right now, it's just a proof of concept. And they literally said that we're waiting to see if we're going to get just enough interest or enough financial support for this. So I think that should tell you something about this industry. There's a lot of interesting concepts, but not many people really understand what blockchain is. Not many people have the infrastructure to do it. And there's just not enough employees to understand how to use blockchain technology.
Is that something that's holding back the industry right now? And you kind of just mentioned a couple of those things right there. But can we point to those things as being the reason why this is not maybe taking off like some people had hoped? Or what do you think is going on there?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a part of it. I think it's a variety of things. One reason, the simple fact that Bitcoin has this bad reputation as being for criminals, I think that prevents some companies from jumping onto it. But honestly, I just think it's the lack of understanding and the lack of expertise in the market. Like, I see stories all the time, for example, of colleges that are starting up blockchain programs, and the people that are asking them to do that are blockchain companies because they just don't have the employees. So we're seeing a lot of interesting solutions every day, and I think eventually we're going to reach the tipping point. But as for right now, it's just not enough investment, not enough personnel, in my opinion.
When you talk about that tipping point, do you mean that we will start to see maybe more adoption, or are we going to see a time where maybe some of this stuff starts to go away, companies start to go out of business or contract or whatnot because there's just not enough of maybe use out there? Which tipping point are you talking about in that scenario?
That's a great question. So I'd say The biggest tipping point is when we get a really good solution that works very well and a lot of big companies use it and they give their seal of approval. But at the same time, I think we'll also see a lot of the smaller companies that are just kind of throwing stuff out there. I think you'll see them start to disappear, especially, I mean, if you look at the initial coin offering market, there are so many false or misleading or scam artists running ICOs. So I think that sort of stuff, I think, is going to contract significantly.
Usually when I have these conversations about blockchain and things of this nature, I always say, well, maybe we should talk a little bit about Bitcoin. And obviously the value there has gone up and down tremendously over the past year plus, and we're back to a point now where it's going back up. What's your take on what's going on there, just in terms of the price that's out there right now and the value?
I think it depends on a lot of different things. I think there's so much speculation, especially right now in the Chinese market, where any little event will cause a massive uptake or downtake in the value. So I think I'm not honestly sure if we're ever going to see it stabilized. I think it's either going to go so extremely high that it just makes a whole lot of people rich, or it's going to dip down so low that everyone forgets about it. And I don't think we're going to see much in the middle with that. And I honestly think maybe as something like Ethereum or some other virtual currency comes into the market, we might even see Bitcoin lose some of its market value.
One more thing I want to touch base on, we had talked about coming in here, was this whole supply chain management and blockchain. And it's funny because I have seen commercials about this. I forget which company it is, but they are showing how a product will go from point A to point B using the blockchain. They show some of these commercials on CNBC, which is obviously the target market that you would want for that. So talk a little bit about what's going on specifically there and why we might be seeing more of that in the future going forward.
Sure. Well, obviously the big one is Walmart itself started to use this technology just to track, okay, where's our produce coming from, especially romaine lettuce, because obviously there's E. coli outbreaks constantly. So you really want to be able to track, okay, where was this grown, at what point was it infected, and things like that. But you're also seeing a lot of smaller startups use this technology as well. Like I can't remember the name of it, but it was one that tracks to see in Islamic countries if the food is halal, if it's clean to eat, and they track that not only where it's grown, but who raised it, who was the butcher that, prepared it, things like that. So I think that's going to be a very good product for retailers out there. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that, especially with the demand for transparency, especially as, many customers are looking at, you say this is organic, you say this is healthy, but can you really prove it?
Sure. Yeah, that's definitely one area I did not really think about in terms of an application for it. So, well, listen, Bradley, thanks for taking the time this week. I really appreciate it. And I am sure that we will be talking again somewhere down the road.
No problem. Thank you so much.
That's going to do it for the Mobile Payments Today podcast this week. I want to thank Don Bush again for coming onto the show. And don't forget, Don will be back in 2 weeks as we continue our fraud series with the folks over at Kount. And thanks again to Bradley Cooper, who is the editor of Digital Signage Today and Blockchain Tech News. You can access both those sites from Mobile Payments Today. If you scroll all the way down on the homepage, there's a menu there to access the rest of our sites. And from there, you can jump on over to Blockchain Tech News and Digital Signage Today. If you haven't done so already, please hit that subscribe button on the service that you used to listen to this podcast, and then rate and review our podcast as well. That stuff helps us out, helps us get trending, helps us get noticed, and it gives us an idea of who's listening to the show as we go forward here in the weeks to come. Also, check us out on Twitter at MobilePayToday. Again, that is at MobilePayToday. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, I am at W_Hernandez16. Again, at W_Hernandez16. Thanks for joining us this week, and we'll see you back again here next week.